I'm honored to be joined by three dedicated New Yorkers. New York Police Department Lieutenant Eric Adams is president and co-founder of the organization 100 Blacks in Law Enforcement Who Care. Former City Council member Kathryn represented downtown Manhattan and continues to reside there. Rabbi Joseph Pataznic is chaplain of the New York City Fire Department and spiritual leader of Congregation Mount Sinai in Brooklyn Heights. Welcome to CityWide.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It was a day like no other day in our lifetimes. Whatever events people might have thought, the assassination of JFK, other things where you remember where you were, nothing has had an impact in our lifetimes the way the events of September 11th did. Joe Pataznic, you are a rabbi in Brooklyn Heights, within eyesight of the Trade Center. What was September 11th like for you?
It was surreal. I remember running to the synagogue and seeing people running over the bridge to come to Brooklyn Heights. Brooklyn Heights became like the borough of refuge. People bleeding, a woman bleeding profusely and saying, before I lose any more of this blood, where can I donate it to help someone else? And my son's working down there. I don't know if he's okay. I need a phone. How am I going to get home? The transportation had stopped. People were really in a state of panic, in a state of confusion, and I remember having the synagogue open all of its doors and making all the phones available, putting furniture out in the street for people just to sit. Water was being given out. So it was a time of coming apart, but a time of coming together.
Now you were also, and still are, the chaplain for the New York City Fire Department. And in that capacity, when did you realize the enormity of what was happening to the fire department?
Shortly after we had used the synagogue as a triage center, I ran over the bridge and immediately saw something that I could never have envisioned in my entire life. The collapsed building, people screaming, firefighters still involved in rescue, other rescue personnel, fathers looking for sons. I'll never forget a father frantically looking for his son in that debris. It is something that is indescribable. We've seen many pictures, many accounts, but as many as we see, those who were there, those who lived through those moments, I don't think can ever encapsulate into any words or pictures what was felt during that time.
And your colleague, Michael Judge, another chaplain in the fire department, was among those to be killed.
Ken, what makes this so eerie is I was with Michael Judge on September the 10th. We were at a rededication of a firehouse in the Bronx, and he turned to me. We were just talking about how we had been together over the years at various events, and he said, you know, Joe, I've come to learn we have to hold each other as long as we have each other. That was his statement, almost prophetic, the day before.
Kathryn, you were an elected official. You were a candidate for public office that happened to be the Democratic primary election day. But I think of greatest significance, you lived walking distance from the Trade Center. Were you even able to get home that night?
Oh, well, I was out campaigning and, you know, primary day. And for me, the thing I remember, it was one of those incredibly crystal clear days with an azure blue sky. There was no clouds. I was actually standing south of Chambers Street on Greenwich Street, about 2.5 blocks north of the Trade Center, north of 7. And you know, we were handing out literature, whatever, talking, you know, waiting. Kids were going into school, parents were talking on the way out.
A normal day.
Normal primary day. You know, everybody knew everyone else, even the opponents, friendly, talking. We heard the plane coming. And everyone turned and said, why is that plane so low? We turned around to look at it and we just followed it. And I still remember it. I swear there was a sonic boom, and then the engines cut off and it just glided right into the Trade Center. And there was about a 2-second delay. And then people started screaming and crying. And I know I went into the school to try and calm the parents down and work with the principals, and you know, we got the kids in the auditorium. And as I came out, I heard the second plane coming and looked up and saw the fireball. So I was there for everything. I saw everything there was to see. I saw people jumping. I saw the towers come down. I even saw 7 come down.
And then you yourself were within the zone, I guess the frozen zone that they created at that point.
Oh, all of it. But I mean, part of, well, I actually helped organize a lot of the different tenant organizations and get people, because we had so many people in the complex I live in. There are a lot of homebound people. They couldn't get their aids in.
Senior citizens.
Senior citizens. We had to set up ways to get food to them. People couldn't get prescription drugs. They couldn't get information out because, of course, the lines were all down. Most of the area didn't have electricity. A lot of the area was vacated, had to be, mandatorily evacuated. I helped with a number of the evacuations. I helped carry people out. And then I also went all around downtown, which was my district, and went to like Southridge, which was another large complex, very impacted. Some of the lofts. I mean, I never left. And I just spent the entire time doing what I could, try to get generators in, trying to put people in contact. At one point I had to go to NYU downtown because people needed prescription drugs. They needed to see doctors to get them to come around to talk to people. Truthfully, a lot of the residents kind of felt abandoned. I mean, and yet at the same time, most of us also ended up volunteering because we were there anyway, so we helped with the food. A lot of people were down, volunteers at Ground Zero itself. I spent the next several weeks helping people just whatever they had to do, get into their apartments, trying to hook things up, just whatever I could do.
Eric, were you on duty that day, and how did you hear about what was going on, and how does a city like New York mobilize its emergency response?
I was up all night helping with, because there was a campaign going on, and we were trying to help with the candidates that we endorsed or wanted to assist. And I recall that night, it was around about 8:45, 8:46. We were headed down the FDR, the West Side Highway, when the plane hit, and immediately calling law enforcement. The first thing we thought of was terrorism. It just doesn't happen. The plane doesn't strike our building. And immediately I thought of my kid brother, who's a member of the department, and I was concerned about his safety and wanted to make sure that he was all right. And that was probably my primary concern at that time. And after speaking with him on the phone, there was a sigh of relief. And then the reality hit that no matter how well my brother was, my brother's assistant in law enforcement and civil service, we knew there was going to be casualties. And so there was a concern there. And as the numbers started to come in, our friends in the fire department, and our friends in the uniformed services, and then the reality that sometimes is often forgotten, the countless numbers of dishwashers and clerks and janitors, sometimes are lost, and the families who lost their titles, they left being ma and pa, and just to go home to widow and orphan, and no longer aunt and uncle. And the devastation is reaching so far, and still today, many people have not put their lives back together. And what I'm happy to see is just the outpouring of love from New Yorkers. And if there's any glimmer of hope that comes out of this entire thing, is to see how New Yorkers have pulled together.
Yeah, the relief efforts were just extraordinary. The number of people who opened up their hearts and their wallets and time. People didn't know necessarily what to do, but they found something to do.
Yes.
I remember at one point we started saying to people, enough. We don't need any more T-shirts. We didn't need any more socks. And I remember going down there and seeing people just hand out water. So many volunteers. In the past, we would beg for volunteerism, and all of a sudden we saw this outpouring from so many people. Denomination was secondary. No one ever asked, are you religious, non-religious, Jewish, Christian, Muslim? No one asked the question. No one cared about color or label. In that sense, it was a very defining moment about the greatness. And also the primary became secondary. Right here you invested all this time in seeking political office, and now you find primary is on hold.
I mean, it was just you get back to doing what you had to do to help people.
So true.
Now, we talk about the long-term effects of this. Kathryn, you yourself are suffering health effects from this even today.
I've been diagnosed with chemically induced bronchitis. The air was so caustic. In fact, there was a U.S. Geological Survey report that said breathing that air was like swallowing liquid Drano. And for those of us who were down there, and that's also, I have like the World Trade Center cough that everyone on the site had. And most people downtown who live within that close area, between what happened on September 11th and then we were directly across from where the barge operation, the debris removal was. So for the next 8 months, we kept getting kind of redusted with the Trade Center dust as everything went out. And then there were 750 diesel truck trips a day going past us. So everybody suffered, I mean, and are still suffering. I actually had neighbors who died from respiratory complications because the air was just so bad and they couldn't get out of the area. And
Ken, can I make just one comment
Yeah.
about that? The dust. Someone raised this question. Living downtown, dust on the window could have been particles from a human being,
probably was.
right? And the person said, what do I do with those particles?
Yeah.
Simply to discard them is insulting to the memory,
Right.
of a loved one, of a human being.
Well,
so this
that's-
became a question that was asked of religious authorities.
And what's
Yeah.
the answer?
I thought someone gave a very fine answer. He said, take a cloth, wipe the window, but take that cloth and bury it, or give it to a funeral chapel for burial at a cemetery. I think that was an appropriate way of treating something which ordinarily would be discarded with the decency that it deserves.
And just
Right.
by looking
Well-
at those things, you begin to see the complexity of just
Sure.
trying to resolve the everyday issues of trying to be respectful, attempting to ensure that everyone receives the needed services. And I think it's imperative that because of the emotionalism that's involved, we must get down to ensure that, one, something like this doesn't happen again, to ensure that the recruiting effort is done properly, and also ensure that there are those out there that's going to use this for their own evil deeds. You know, there are many who try to profit off of terrible situations like this, and I think we must become vigilant to ensure that the services are sent to the right families, the right members, and they're not in any way abused.
CityWide will continue right after this.
I think you should wear a tie.
Dad, nobody wears ties to school.
Tie says you're serious. It'll make a good impression. And remember, you're there to study,
to learn, and to make something of myself. I got it.
Almost half of all UNCF students are the first in their family to go to college.
They have some great architecture classes.
Dad, I'm not really interested in architecture.
Well, keep your options open. And remember, no girls until your
Until my work is done.
And I'd make sure that I got my lunch.
Dad, you're not going. I am.
I know.
Well, listen, we better get going. Don't want to be late the first day in.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And when you're the first to go, you're going for a lot of people. The United Negro College Fund. A mind is a terrible thing to waste.
Welcome back to CityWide. As we recognize the first anniversary of September 11th, 2001, we're speaking with three New Yorkers about the changes that have taken place in New York City. Eric, one of the results, I think, of the attack has been that a lot of what seemed to be important in politics and in public debate seems trivial in retrospect. The nuances, the small things that divide candidates just don't seem to be as important. Do you think that New Yorkers are focused on more substantive issues today than they were before September 11th?
Yeah, I believe so. I believe September 11 jarred our consciousness and basically compelled us to not only open our hands by making donation, also to open our hearts to understand that every day we should live it as important as if we don't know what our outcomes are going to be. And the spirit of not only New York, but America is strong. I don't think we have a defeatist attitude where we wake up believing that our lives will be terminated. But I think September 11 brought us to a reality check, and some of the minor strifes that we've had, that we've sort of come together. And I'm hoping that it continues to build bridges. There are groups that I haven't interacted with since I've been in New York, and now I have sat down and interacted with, and we're attempting to make this a better city, and hopefully will be.
But it's also created a new set of issues, if you will, or cast some issues in a different light. In the weeks immediately after the attack, you met with Muslim law enforcement officials,
Yes.
rank and file, police officers, court officers, and the like, who happened to be of the Muslim faith, who were concerned about being scapegoated in this
Exactly.
process. Yet New York seemed to have relatively few incidents. There were some incidents, but compared to the kind of reaction that one might have expected, people acting out of anger and fear, it didn't seem to be as bad as it could have been.
Right, and that was my concern. My concern because right side by side with African American, Hispanic, Jewish, and all other law enforcement officers were Muslim law enforcement officers, firefighters. They were there, and they were using their hands to dig out whatever rescue attempt was there. And some of them were concerned about their families while they were there, being Americans at ground zero, what was happening to their families. And I was happy to see that many New Yorkers did not turn an ugly face of hate towards those who were of a different religious group. Their families wore hijabs, they wore the traditional Muslim clothing, and for the most part, there were very few incidents where the various mosques were attacked or family members were attacked, not only from law enforcement officers, but for other individuals. There were very few cases.
But now let me ask you the flip side of that. Because in addition to being a police officer, you had an organization that has been very deeply involved with issues of police conduct, civil rights, racial profiling. And now we're in a situation where the president has told us that we are in a war with terrorists, and the impetus for the attack and that war has come largely out of the Middle East, out of people who are of the Muslim faith and who are Arabs. What does that tell us about racial profiling in that context? Should Judge Pataznic and Kathryn Freed receive the same scrutiny going onto an airplane as someone who's wearing a traditional Muslim dress?
I think that's an excellent question. I think that's an important question because that question is going to define us as a nation. I believe that it was important to see how we in the law enforcement community, how we view those who were part of the traditional part of terrorism. And there's so many innocent people that have come from those countries where there's a large number of people who are terrorists come from. So it was a challenge for law enforcement. Expediency is not good policing. It taught us to use our skills to properly identify criminal behavior and not ethnicities to determine who's a criminal. And I think for the most part, the law enforcement officers have done that and have done a great job across the country. The Federal Bureau of Investigation, some of the Central Intelligence Agencies, and some of the local police municipalities, how they've handled the issue of not profiling a person merely because of their ethnicity or their religious belief, but based on some of the criminal profiles and some of the criminal data, and I think we've done an excellent job of doing that.
I remember when the federal building in Oklahoma City was destroyed. Many people immediately assumed that it was somebody from the Middle East, and it turned out to be a white American.
Right.
So true.
And I think there's something that needs to be said, and I commend you, who has spent so much of your life in trying to bring different groups together. We didn't just begin talking with those who were different on September the 12th or the 11th. We were talking to many of them on September the 10th. We had a relationship, not as strong as it should have been, but we opened the doors more widely after the 11th. And I think the reason the greatness of America, and in this case New York, was so manifest was because there were so many good people before the 11th who had worked so assiduously to try to bring people together. We have continued the dialogue. I've never been to so many churches as I have this past year. I've been with Muslims in various settings to try to understand one another, and I think we are strengthening the relationship that we had before, but we shouldn't minimize what we had before.
So true.
Because we didn't just start building on the 11th.
Okay, but when you deal with leaders of the Muslim faith, with the imams and with the community leaders, are you satisfied that they have publicly expressed satisfactory or sufficient anger with the events that occurred? Do you feel that there's it's yes but approach, and do you think that the media has given adequate coverage to the comments that have been made by responsible people?
Yes and no. I think that there are those from whom we expected more, who have been sadly silent or qualifying in their statements. There are others who have come forward very courageously and have condemned without any qualification what has occurred and continue to be very vocal. So I think we have to be very careful that we don't stereotype, that we don't put everybody together in that same grouping. I don't think there's any community anywhere that has perfect leadership. I think some are just better than others, and we have to continue to seek relationships with those who we feel stand for what is decent and will not remain silent when the indecent manifests itself. That is a responsibility that we all have, and I think we have found many. We need to find many more.
One of the differences between this one day of war in New York City and what our parents' generation experienced in World War II is the extensive media saturation, the coverage of the event, the aftermath of it, and the ability of the media to highlight or downplay certain aspects of it. Has that helped the overall racial situation, or is it hurt it? Are they too politically correct or too jingoistic?
You know, I see some media people who try very hard to convey what they feel is an accurate picture, but I do see those who are concerned so much about the sensational. You know, that that which is explosive sells very quickly, and there are those who don't give the other side, and you have all of these meetings going on, all of these gatherings between people who really care, and just a blurb will get into the paper or into the middle of the paper, and on the front page, the hate mongers are given a full page coverage. So I think media needs to show greater concern for the good stories. But there are, again, I don't want to stereotype media either. I think there are some who try very hard, but others need to try more.
Kathryn, is the volume of media coverage overwhelming?
I think the truth is everyone at this point who lives downtown, works downtown, a lot of people almost wish the anniversary would go away, that we're tired of seeing it. You can't turn on the TV without, you know, seeing another program about September 11th. And it's kind of interesting, you just mentioned about how one day of war, but I have to point out that downtown, for a lot of us, it's been a year that not only has, like everyone else, our lives have been affected, but the ongoing problems that we've still got to try and get attention to some of the problems that we've got, like the questions we've still got about the environment, about the air, the fact that almost probably 80 to 90% of the residents, people living right around the Trade Center, have never been cleaned. And, you know, we've now been living with probably asbestos and lead and some contamination for a year. And, you know, at the same time, we've had, just in the last couple of weeks, I've probably gone to 4 rallies, 10 meetings on the environment, trying to get attention to that, everything from not only the air quality questions, but even the economic development questions, because so many people were hit so hard. And we actually can't get a lot of focus on that. And we're having problems getting our issues resolved, and
It's
we're
also
kind of frustrated about that.
Also shaping the way the residents are viewing what should happen with Lower Manhattan.
Well, very much so, and I think a lot of us are thinking, can we really want to deal with the things that we're facing that we can't get answers to, because we don't know what the
I think, and I think again, you raise an important point about the media, because I think at the same time we need to display some form of responsible journalism. If we're not careful, we will put the city in a perpetual state of mourning, when we have to move from this level and now focus on some of those very real issues that Kathryn is talking about. And that's why I believe it's imperative that you allocate an appropriate time to mourn and the lives you lost. Now we have to focus on some very real issues and get the city back operating.
It can be us against them, downtown against the rest of New York. It's going to be one community.
Right.
My heartfelt thanks on this day to New York Police Department Lieutenant Eric Adams, president of the organization 100 Blacks in Law Enforcement Who Care, former New York City Council member Kathryn Freed, and Rabbi Joseph Pataznic, chaplain of the New York City Fire Department. The firehouse around the corner from where I live was one of the first to respond. Almost all of the firefighters from that fire company were killed in the attack and the aftermath. Some of our neighbors told us that they worked in the World Trade Center and saw firefighters that they knew from our neighborhood walking up the steps that day as they were walking down. That image has haunted me for the last year. What it tells us is that not everyone has the fortitude to walk up 105 flights of stairs into a burning building, but each of us has the capacity to take one step up. Given the choice between doing something for ourselves or doing something for others, we honor the memories of those who sacrificed on September 11th by taking that one step up. That's all for this edition of CityWide. I'm Ken Fisher. Thank you for joining us.